On this episode of the DTVC Extra podcast, we're going to be looking at the Supergirl movie that just came out recently. Also look a little bit at the Superman movie, but if you want more about what I thought about that movie, you can check out DTVC podcast episode 220, where Freddie Young from Full Moon Reviews and we talked about that Superman movie when it came out last year. Also, if you want to check out our previous episodes on the Superman franchise, episodes of DTVC Extra, it's 32, 33, and 34, where I talk about the original Superman movies. The one that talks specifically about Supergirl, the original Supergirl, that is DTVC Extra 33, so you can check that out as well. Now, also, Todd Liebenow from Forgotten Filmcast, when we're going to be talking about Strike Commando here on next week's podcast episode, I did have to ask him about the new Supergirl, just because he mentioned liking that original Supergirl, which I think we both enjoyed that. And so it was cool to talk with him about that. I'm going to do my best in this conversation here not to step on that at all. So, probably there'll be a little overlap in some of the things we talk about in there. But for the most part, I won't step on that conversation. So that'll be kind of fresh as well when you check that out next week. Now, Supergirl is going to be the first half of this episode. Second half, I'm going to talk about my newest novel, Mark and Sales. I'm going to talk about sort of some of the inspirations for some of the characters, the story, all of that in there. So I get asked that when my new books come out, people who read them are like, oh, how'd you come up with this character? How'd you come up with that thing? And then, Rich Haas reached out because he just recently read Mark and Sales. He's like, you should talk about it on your podcast. And I was like, actually, this kind of works out perfectly for Supergirl to kind of talk about it in the second half there. So, after I'm done talking about Supergirl, if you want to stick around, here kind of there's sort of the process and how I created Mark and Sales. You can stay tuned for that. Also, I'm going to talk a little bit about the World Cup because obviously some real crazy stuff happened there with the whole, U.S. player getting suspended and then Trump putting his thumb on the scale and getting him reinstated, and then the team playing horribly. Local radio station I listen to, Felger, the host there, he said it's like when a kid's not good enough to play on a traveling team or play like in a Little League team, and the parents force the coach to play them, and then the team loses horribly because, it's kind of a similar, it kind of feels the same way. But anyway, I talk about international soccer on here quite a bit, especially when Scott Murphy from All 90s Action comes on to talk Seagal. So I figure we'll end this episode talking about that a little bit as well. But I kind of want to set it up so we talk about Supergirl first, my book second, and the World Cup third. So that way, kind of like progressively, depending on how long you want to stick around, it's all there for you. So, but I didn't want to start with any of that stuff because people coming over to me, hearing me talk about Supergirl are going to be like, well, where is that coming? So, yeah, so those things will come later as well. So, but anyway, without any further ado, why don't we get stuck in here on Supergirl? So, remember where we left off on the episode, was episode 34 of the DTVC Extra, where I talked about, was it Superman Returns, I believe is what the name of that movie was. But you remember we were talking about that one, and I kind of left off there, kind of with the dawn of, I guess maybe the dawn of the DC Extended Universe. But really, where we left off there, Superman Returns, Batman Begins, they come out within a year of each other, and DC decides to move through the Batman Begins process and shelve Superman Returns, and that's where they get big successes with The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. And so one of the interesting things, of course, is that DC had been working this strategy and I don't think it was an official strategy. It was one that sort of was born, it just sort of just happened, right? That they do the first two Superman movies, those do really well. They do the third movie, not so much, Supergirl, not so much, and then, of course, Superman 4, not great at all. And then at the same time, within a couple of years, Batman comes out, and Batman is suddenly the runaway hit that the first Superman was. So now they focus on Batman. Batman doesn't, kind of falls off, which I'm a fan of Batman and Robin. I don't know. George Clooney in a tux just kind of works for me, but that's just me. And Bat Nipples is always a funny concept, but I don't know. I like that movie, but it was considered a flop at the time. And there was sort of like an agonizing reappraisal of things on DC's side. And I think they had talked about doing, one of the things I read is that they were thinking about doing a Batman versus Superman movie in the early 2000s, and the director that they tapped to do that ended up doing Troy instead. Do you remember that Troy movie with like Brad Pitt and what was it? I don't know who else was in that movie, but I think Peter O'Toole might have been in it as well. Whatever that he did that movie instead, and they shelved it and decided to make Catwoman instead of doing that. So then, as the mid 2000s come on, that's when they decide they're going to try Superman and Batman again and see which one sticks. And in that intervening period, in the early 2000s, of course, Marvel is finally getting into the comic book movie world in more in earnest than they ever had before. But when you look at the numbers, Spider-Man is a hit. And then, X-Men does a good job of sort of inserting Hugh Jackman as Wolverine into the zeitgeist, but they weren't getting these big financial gains that you would want from that. And part of that's just how Fox made those movies, that they just weren't really going all out. But then you have a whole bunch of other Marvel properties that get turned into movies that just don't stick for whatever reason. You got the Fantastic Four movies, and you get a sequel out of those, but, they're just kind of, they do okay. Ghost Rider, right, which we get the first Ghost Rider from Nicolas Cage that felt like it was sautéed in wrong sauce. Then we get that sequel that just is this bonkers Nicolas Cage thing that I really love. But, again, it's not really anything that DC would really have to worry about or think they need to be concerned about. And so as they start getting success with the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, especially with the Dark Knight, I think there's a sense that they probably could just keep sticking to this formula of doing either Superman or Batman and sort of cycling between the two. They do step away from it a bit in 2011, where they try Green Lantern. It's the only time really they try what I would consider their big five characters. It's the only time they try a big five character outside of Batman and Superman. And when I think of their big five characters, I would say it's Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and then I guess probably Green Lantern, then the Flash. I think that might be the big five from them. And maybe I'm putting the Flash up too high, but I've always kind of seen him around a lot. And then, of course, kind of go down a little bit, another step when you get like, Aquaman, Martian Manhunter. I think our Martian Manhunter was kind of just always in things, like he was just always around, but you wouldn't think about making a Martian Manhunter movie. But I think out of those five, they decided to try it with Green Lantern. It flops, and so I think they feel like, okay, we're good where we are here. But what's interesting is that there's this parallel track happening where, while Batman Batman Begins is doing well, the Christopher Nolan Batman movies are doing well. Spider-Man has wrapped up. Not intentionally wrapped up. They do the movie with Sam Raimi, the third Sam Raimi movie. I think it does well, but I think they would have liked, for the amount of money they put into that movie, they would have liked it to earn more than it did. But it does well enough. And there was a sense they were going to make a fourth Sam Raimi movie, but there's a delay on it, right? And it's not happening. And then Kevin Feige kind of comes up with this crazy, grinchy idea of, why don't I just take some of these Marvel characters that aren't attached to any other companies that we have the rights to, and why don't I see what I can do with them? And the thing is that when he does the first Iron Man movie, he was always, his favorite comic book movie is the original Superman movie. So even though that movie's not like a beat by beat remake of it, I would say like Black Panther is closer to that. It's closer to like you can really see the DNA of Superman in Black Panther. Whereas I think Kevin Feige was more inspired to make his own movie with Iron Man. But what he does in that intervening period, as the Dark Knight is breaking records, and then Marvel is sort of in the ascendancy with Kevin Feige's MCU is in ascendancy, he makes Iron Man into the new Superman. And so while DC is sort of taking their time, getting these Batman movies out, and there's really no impetus to kind of do the Zack Snyder Superman, which John Cross from After Movie Done, I've got to give him a shout out here for his nickname Hack Snyder that he gives to Zack Snyder. And I don't know if I'll ever do those Superman movies. I may do the whole DC Extended Universe at some time. So I would probably include them with that. But as Marvel is sort of building up in sort of, what was it, 2008 when Iron Man comes out. And but over that intervening period between 2008 and 2013, when the Man of Steel comes out, at that time Marvel has essentially, Kevin Feige has established Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man as the new Superman. So when that Superman movie finally comes out, it does poorly, especially compared to the third Iron Man movie, which I think of those three Iron Man movies. I liked it. I thought it was really good. But I think it shows that even if that movie wasn't as good as, it certainly wasn't as good as the original Superman, but it was kind of maybe on the Marvel, MCU movie rankings, I think it would be lower down the list. But it does that well because it had, Feige had so well established Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man as this huge linchpin of what he was doing. The same time, he establishes Chris Evans as Captain America. And so now we've got this whole Avengers thing going on here as well. And so DC kind of wakes up, in the early 2010s to a new reality, and the Man of Steel comes out in that new reality. Now, I had heard that they had already talked about doing Batman versus Superman the moment, I think, it was kind of essentially as they were talking in 2013 about they kind of already were planning that. And they were talking about maybe even having Christopher Nolan's Batman be involved. But the thing was at the end of the third Christopher Nolan movie, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it yet, but Christian Bale's Batman, Bruce Wayne retires, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt takes over. And they're like, okay, well, do we want to do Joseph Gordon-Levitt versus Henry Cavill? Like that, there's a part of them that felt like that wouldn't work. Like if we're finally getting Batman versus Superman, right, it's got to be something. It's got to be Bruce Wayne versus Clark Kent, right? It's got to be that level of Superman. So they decided, okay, we're going to introduce a new Batman into this, but they're going to do this. But the thing is, because Marvel had been swooping past them at this point and had finally created this challenge to them that they that the DC's approach for so long, with just using Batman and Superman and trading between those two and not really worrying about what Marvel is doing. Now Marvel's just kicking stuff out and beating them at every turn. And part of it was this Avengers idea of, we're going to add a couple characters here or there, and then we're going to bring them all together as a big team. And so then they were like, okay, well, we can't just do Batman versus Superman. We got to do Batman versus Superman Dawn of Justice, right? It's going to be the Justice League. We're going to be introducing the Justice League. We're going to bring in Wonder Woman as well. We're going to finally introduce her on the big screen. And the thing about that movie, the Batman versus Superman movie, is that it had a huge opening Friday, but then also like record plummets. Not just like record plummets between week to week, but even within the weekend. I think it had like a record drop from the Friday audience to the Sunday audience. And a record drop, of course, from the first weekend to the second weekend, and then the second weekend to the third weekend. And so when you look at the overall numbers for that movie, it was, what did it make? Like 800 million, something like that? Almost 875 million. Which again, on a budget of 250 million, you want to be close to a billion there, right? That's where you want to be. That's where you'd want Batman versus Superman. Something so anticipated like that should be, pulling in record grosses, right? It should be not even probably $1 billion movie. It should be, kind of like when Superman came. I'm sorry, when Star Wars came back after a long hiatus, and they started what they call now the sequel trilogy. I think both of those first two movies earned over $2 billion. Like, that's probably what you should want from Batman versus Superman. But the movie itself was so lackluster that audiences, like, one, nobody was going to see it a second time because they're like, I saw this. But word of mouth was killing it. People were like, I don't know that, don't watch, just get it on DVD when it comes out, or we'll rent it. At that time you still could kind of rent movies. I guess actually, yeah, there's still enough of a rental, Netflix rental. I guess, I don't know, 2016 at that point, right? We're probably kind of beyond that, where we're at the point of everything's either streaming or you're getting it through your cable company on streaming. So the video store is kind of getting frozen out at that point. But still, it was this kind of this lackluster thing, and it signals. It was a harbinger of things to come with the DC extended universe. You saw, bright spots that would happen here or there, like the Suicide Squad does well, and then of course the first Wonder Woman movie did really well. I think the second Wonder Woman movie, I think I didn't like that movie, but I think when you look at, like, I guess its box office can't be compared because it was put on streaming at the same time, but I think the streaming numbers that it pulled when it came out, I think it sort of boosted HBO Max a little bit more for them, and so I think that has to be taken into consideration. So it's not the complete dud, but then also, obviously we talked about Aquaman in 2018 doing Aquaman, and between the two Infinity War movies doing over $1 billion, right? And that's, again, that's probably fool's gold when we think of that. But The thing is that the Superman movies were not doing it, and even Superman versus Batman, that was like, that's the big card that DC had, and it only got them so far, and you can look at different ways that the DC extended universe was sauteed in wrong sauce. I mean, I think, for example, Shazam. Shazam is a really fun movie. It does, maybe money wise, it didn't do so well, but it was a fun time. It was worth watching. That second movie should have had Black Adam as the bad guy in it. But instead they get The Rock, and The Rock's like, well, no, I want my own movie as Black Adam, so I don't want to be the bad guy in somebody else's movie. Can you imagine, like, in the Marvel and the MCU, like, Feige doing, kowtowing to somebody like that? Like, Feige would be like, fine, you don't want to do it, we'll get somebody else to do it. People want to be in these movies. They want to be a part of this. And so, yeah, we're not going to bother. We'll get somebody else. And that's probably what they should have done. They should have gotten somebody else to play Black Adam and just moved on from The Rock. But instead, they tried to split the difference, and neither movie does well. So we're seeing sort of this kind of falling out of the DC extended universe. At the same time, James Gunn has that incident, or I don't know what it was, but I guess it was an old tweet or something. Whatever it was, Disney fires him, and in the period before he comes back and makes the third Guardians of the Galaxy movie, he makes a new Suicide Squad movie that kind of steps all over the original Suicide Squad movie, and doesn't necessarily do that well. But I guess they were impressed enough with Gunn that when David Zaslav took over in the HBO Discovery TNT whatever merger there, he's like, okay, let's have James Gunn be our Kevin Feige. Let's do that. And so now it's of course it was an interesting move, because then Gunn was like, well, we're not really doing any of this extra DC extended universe stuff. And so at that point, they were kind of just pumping out movies that they had made and just hoping they'll make something. And all of them flop. That whole year of movies flops for DC extended universe. Because people were like, well, I get, what am I investing in here if they're not going to make any more movies with these characters? It doesn't really matter to us anymore. And of course, there were other things too. That Ezra Miller is the Flash thing. At the same time that you had Grant Gustin as the Flash on the Arrowverse, that everybody loved him. Whereas Ezra Miller, they had all of these, these scandals, all of the, serious allegations against them. And, the audience that comes to comic book movies a lot of times, they don't just ignore that kind of thing. And so people just weren't interested in it. And so James Gunn takes over, right? And he announces, like, I'm going to do this kind of the right way. I've got the plan in mind for how I'm going to make this happen. And of course, he wants to start off with Superman. He's going to finally kind of bring Superman back. And I think one of the things about him coming back and doing Superman, starting his whole, this new DC off with Superman, is that I think the Man of Steel hack Snyder, using John's term there, Henry Cavill darker Superman kind of thing, it was enough of a palate cleanser from Christopher Reeve that we were ready to start over. We were ready to accept a new Superman. And so I think that was part of it, that he was able to pull that one off in that way. I think it was interesting too. Of course, he has other superheroes in it. He's kind of adding that in. But it's interesting because the movie itself, it does well enough at the box office. But again, you feel like if you're leading off with Superman, you want to get in that $1 billion range. And movies weren't really doing that last year. I mean, the other thing too is that I think, if you're going Superman versus Jurassic Park, the Jurassic Park movie that came out last year, you'd think Superman would do better than Jurassic Park, but it actually didn't work out that way. And so it's interesting, because I think that there was, as much as I really enjoyed that new Superman movie. And again, you can hear Freddie and I talk about that on the podcast episode where we covered it there, 220 in the archives if you haven't listened yet. And so I really enjoyed that one, but there's also a sense that, like, what kind of momentum are they building with that? And it's interesting because you go back to 2008 with Iron Man, and the momentum there was that, like, okay, I want to see this Robert Downey Jr. guy do more Iron Man stuff, right? I want to see him in another movie. And again, part 2 is an interesting one because I love Mickey Rourke as the villain in that. A lot of people didn't. I think the thing that doesn't age well is the fact that he's like buddy with Elon Musk, right? That's the part that doesn't really age well. I think the Mickey Rourke, I don't know, I had fun with that. But they bring in Nick Fury some more. They kind of bring in some more stuff here, right? Nick Fury, Black Widow. So we get more of the universe being built out there. But there was a lot of anticipation built there. And I do kind of wonder what anticipation was built out of that Superman movie. I mean, I was excited to see this Supergirl movie, but I don't know how many people were. And the other thing, of course, is that one of the things James Gunn wanted to avoid was post-credit sequences that teased future movies. Now, he does have a sequence within the film where we see Supergirl. So we do get introduced to her at the end of that movie. But he didn't want to do things to teasing because the problem is that Marvel would do that and they would be stuck in a lot of cases. And he knew that firsthand with Guardians of the Galaxy because they teased Adam Warlock at the end of the second movie. And he knew he was going to have to use him in the third movie. And he had developed a whole story that didn't really fit Adam Warlock. And he had to kind of shoehorn Adam Warlock in there. And he wanted to get away from that kind of thing. But I do wonder if it's a different scenario now and he needed to do something to build the momentum there. Because I think that's the problem. Is there's not a lot of buzz or momentum about this DC Extended Universe. Now, again, going back to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because I think it's the best I don't know, template. I don't know what the word paradigm. It's the best example we have, because the reality is that other than these sort of one-offs or these small concentrated situations like the Sam Raimi Superman movies, the Tim Burton Batman, or the Donner Superman, or I guess the Christopher Nolan Batman. There's generally not a history of comic book movies always doing well all the time like this. Kevin Feige had created something completely different here. He was the exception that proved the rule, but then with Hollywood, when you're the exception that proves the rule, right? Everyone wants to chase the exception. Everyone wants to try to do it. But the thing that he does with that Marvel Extended Universe, again, he hinges it on a character in Iron Man, played by Robert Downey Jr., that's just really compelling. Like, we just want to see this character. Now, that Hulk movie doesn't do that well after. Iron Man, kind of introduces some new characters, but not Iron Man. Thor introduces some new characters, but I mean, it's Thor, right? Like, how big of a deal is Thor? And then Captain America, right? And the thing about Captain America, I've talked about this before, is that it really taps into this feeling of like, on Tumblr at that time, you had a lot of younger millennials that were really into like 1940s, 1950s, kind of golden age of Hollywood, that kind of thing. And so for Feige and company to create a Captain America that embodies that feeling, that I remember on Tumblr at the time, just like kids of that age, like sort of that younger millennial, like late 80s, early 90s crowd, they were all over Captain America. And they become this massive force that evangelizes the series and turns it into this big cultural phenomenon. And, I guess that's the thing, right, is that you needed to come out of the gate with Superman. It had to be something like Iron Man. And then as you're building, because I think the one thing about Supergirl is that she's not one of the biggest ones in Marvel. I think you could put her maybe with Thor though on that level. I think she's probably bigger than Thor. So again, the fact that they made a Thor movie, but again, Thor was the fourth movie, right? I think Thor was the fourth one, Captain America was the fifth, and then the Avengers was the sixth one. But yeah, you wonder if maybe you needed two Superman movies and then a Supergirl versus the way they're doing it where it's like a Superman, a Supergirl, and a Superman movie. Like maybe you needed to do it the other way around, because the thing is right now is the Supergirl movie is completely flopped. And I don't think it deserved that. I don't think it deserved to be this, struggling this much at the box office. I mean, the budget is somewhere between 170, 180 million, and it's like kind of hovering around 100 million right now that it's made over the 2 weekends that it's been on. And again, once you get past the weekend, that's it. It's just over 100 million so far, and I don't know that it deserved that to happen to it. I don't think it's that bad of a movie, but you can see it coming, right? And I know when we had Freddie on to talk about the Minion, and we were kind of talking about the kind of the state of the theater, of the movie industry right now, kind of what we were seeing with the new releases this year. And he said that, like, yeah, I tried to get a ticket to the Odyssey, and they were almost all sold out. It was hard to find a seat for the Odyssey. Supergirl, I had no problem finding seats, and I did the same thing. I did the same exercise when I was looking at the my Saturday matinee, which Chris the Brain at Bulletproof calls the senior citizen matinee, my morning matinee on Saturday mornings. I looked at, I mean, almost the entire theater was open, and there was like only a few pre-sales, and essentially I could go through the whole day on Saturday, and nobody was buying pre-sale tickets. And I went back into Thursday and Friday as well, and nobody was buying. I mean, you'd see like 10 spots taken in the theater for this, and I guess it's I don't know, it's more, I guess it's interesting. It's more of I was going to say like the wrong decisions, but it's interesting that James Gunn has taken over this thing and is supposed to be the new Kevin Feige, but he's kind of in a spot where he's, I don't know, it's right. Things aren't coming as well as they should. Now, the other thing, of course, is that that Feige had some clunkers in that early stage as well, right? Obviously, the Incredible Hulk one is the most notable one. I mean, it's like whenever an MCU movie does poorly, right? It's like the worst since. Worst opening weekend since the Incredible Hulk, right? Or the worst gross since the, I think like when the Marvels came out, they were just like comparing it to that, So you get that one in there. And I think the one thing about Hulk is that he is probably, maybe fourth or fifth biggest character in the in Marvel, right? I mean, I think Spider-Man's one, my mass accent come out there, Spider-Man. But Spider-Man's one, I think, Wolverine, Deadpool would be 2 and 3. And then I think Hulk is probably 4. I think he's probably right there, just because obviously the TV show as a kid growing up, that for me would have put him there. But it seemed like whenever you would see like Marvel stuff, Hulk would be right there, as a kid, like, cartoon stuff. I mean, Daredevil's probably near there, but I don't think he's quite at that level. I mean, he was bigger in the 80s. Punisher's another one, bigger in the 80s. I think you could even start to put Venom in that category, but I think Hulk is your clear number 4 there. And I guess these numbers have all changed since the MCU came out. Like, I mean, Star-Lord from Guardians of the Galaxy, like, where would you, if you would ask me who Star-Lord was, I wouldn't even know who you're talking about. And then, I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy, I remember that was not a book that anybody read. It was one of those ones that would like they would try it and you'd see it. It would be $1. It'd be like in the dollar category with the other dollar ones, like Amazing Spider-Man was $1. Daredevil. You'd see it. They would try it. They'd maybe get some nice guest stars in there, especially like some real big intergalactic guest stars, and then it would die out and it would go. And so and I. I'm kind of bouncing around here, but that's another comparison people made to this movie, Supergirl, is that they compared it to Guardians of the Galaxy. And there's kind of a sense of like, well, if they could pull off Guardians of the Galaxy, right, why can't you pull off Supergirl? So maybe as I'm starting to kind of get into things like that, why don't I kind of get into the movie some? Because again, I don't know that the movie is so bad that it deserves the kind of treatment that it's gotten here, that it's kind of bombed on this level. But I think there's a bit of a perfect storm happening here that's led to this situation. Maybe I can get into that as well. But the movie itself, Supergirl, it's based off a comic that I haven't read called Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. And it's essentially based off of True Grit. And so Supergirl goes on this intergalactic adventure where a young woman whose family is killed wants revenge. And so she's taking her there to get that revenge, again, like True Grit. They invented a villain for it, Krem. And the comic book was really well received. It's one that is very popular. People really enjoy it. Again, I've never read it, so I don't know. But I think one of the problems with using that story for your first Supergirl movie is True Grit is not about, I guess, what in this movie would be the Supergirl character, but like, the Jeff Bridges character, the Rooster Coughlin. I'm using the more recent one as my example, because I think both adaptations are really good, but that's kind of the more recent example. But it's Haley Steinfeld's character, right? That's the one that the movie is told through, or I guess that's the character. It's not, we don't get like Rooster Cogburn's origin story, right? It's Eve Ridley's character in this, right, is the Haley Steinfeld character in that. Ruthie, I guess, is her name. And so what the movie tried to do in the comic book, they were able to get away with that because we all kind of understand in the comics who Supergirl is, right? We're not being introduced to her. Everybody knows Supergirl, but in this movie, she's being introduced to us, so it needed to be partly her story and partly Ruthie, or, again, the Haley Steinfeld character. So I think that element of it didn't work as well because it kind of split the difference on us. And so it's like I'm looking for true grit and I'm not getting true grit. And I wonder if instead of trying to take an established comic book series for what would an established comic book character, like this maybe is like movie 2. This is like Supergirl 2 as opposed to the original, the first Supergirl movie. And I do wonder if that played a part in it. I think the other thing is that the original Supergirl movie with Helen Slater, we got some really great scenes. I think one is when she's learning her powers. She's learning, what her powers are and everything. This movie skips that altogether. She, ends up on Earth. She meets Clark. She's speaking in the Krypton tongue, so they can't understand each other. And then he's like, "Oh, your powers are going to kick in right now," and then it cuts away. Now, interesting piece of continuity. If she could speak the language, why didn't she tell Clark what his parents said in the message? Because I'm assuming, didn't she meet? The way the movie rolled out in the first movie, she had known him before. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she came after he found out what his parents said from Lex Luthor, translating it. But I kind of feel like maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm getting the timing wrong. But anyway, that's a whole separate point. The point is that was a great scene, and Todd and I talked about how much we enjoyed that scene when he was on the podcast of Helen Slater learning her powers and knowing what her powers are and kind of flying and jumping around and stuff. It's different from Clark Kent's character, Superman's character, because he's born on Earth as a baby and he grows up with his powers, whereas Supergirl gets them suddenly. They just sort of come on her because she's suddenly on a yellow sun planet, and it was. I think you could have done maybe like a 3-minute montage of her learning her powers that would have been really instructive in developing her character that we just kind of missed altogether. That again, the original Supergirl movie did much better with. I think the other thing is this whole point of her not being happy on Earth. The only sense that we get that she's not happy on Earth is she spends like 1 minute like looking out a window while listening to music on a Walkman. I'm telling you, Earth is a shitty place to live. Let's just get it out there. It's not a fun place to live. I think somebody did a cartoon once of like aliens coming down to the planet and seeing like, I don't know, it was like a lynching or something really bad that humans do. And the aliens were like, let's get the hell out of here. We don't need to study these people. We don't need to study these alien beings. Get out of here. I mean, all it would take is like her, riding the subway in Metropolis and a guy, grabbing her butt or something like that, and her reacting. Like maybe she knocks him across the subway. And, it could be a kind of an applause scene, but also a scene of like, oh, I'm not comfortable. Like this place is a mess. Like there's just bad stuff that happens here all the time. And maybe she gets in trouble for knocking him across the subway. It becomes a huge thing when he grabbed her butt on the subway. So the double standard could be played. All stuff that they could have done, but also would have been like, yeah, I just need to get away from this planet. This is a horrible thing. So that's something that could have been played into more, I think. This whole idea of like a red sun is a sun that like she can get, she has diminished power, so she'll get drunk, whereas a yellow sun, she has her powers. And then a green sun, she almost dies. It's a cool idea, but it felt like it was this like, some people talked about it being like a way that she was nerfed, but I think it was almost like artificial padding. Like, for example, we get towards the end of the movie and she's on a planet that has 2 suns, a green sun and a yellow sun. But all the green sun does is just mean she's out of commission for a period. And then it's like, oh, when the yellow sun comes back, she's fine. And the thing is that the green sun never comes back into play. It's not like, oh, I better get this stuff done and beat the baddie before the green sun comes back. Otherwise, I'm in trouble. We none of that is put into play either. So from a story standpoint, it's kind of, again, I think this would work better as a part 2, but it doesn't introduce us, at least for me, it didn't introduce us to Supergirl the way that necessarily you'd want. And again, I think it's playing into sort of part of how the flop has happened here, because I think there's just not a lot of buzz going into the movie, and I think people coming out of the movie, everything I'm hearing from people, it's not, I didn't like the movie, but it's not like this was amazing either. It was like, yeah, that was a good movie, and I'm in that category. I liked the movie. I had fun with it. I mean, I'm here coming up with reasons and ways that they should add to the runtime, right? With like the subway scene, or her interacting with Earth and then her learning about her powers. But yes, an hour and 48 minutes for a comic book movie is beautiful. I absolutely love that. So maybe you could just take a few things out and you could have reconfigured things a little bit. It might have made it a little bit better. I'm loath to try to add time to that hour and 45-minute runtime because that's a beautiful thing. But yeah, I think that's the problem. Is I think ultimately the problem is that this movie couldn't afford to just be good. It needed to be great, and it needed to be great in a way that gets us excited for the next, movie with them. And I'm gonna go see it anyway when it comes out. I'm kind of all in now on comic book movies again. I'm back. They've reeled me back in, and so now it's like whenever one of these come out, I'm not going to see Clayface this fall though. I don't do body horror movies, so I won't be seeing that. But they've kind of got me back in. But yeah, I don't know. Now, of course, the other piece of this, the other big story or the big talking point about this is Lobo. And again, it was interesting because Lobo's kind of playing the same part that Nathan Fillion's Guy Gardner and the other, superheroes in the part one played, where they kind of come in from time to time, sort of help out a little bit and then leave. I mean, he was a fun character. I mean, I remember Lobo for me when I first was collecting comics in the late 80s, early 90s. There's that really iconic Lobo issue 1 from his 4-part miniseries, which is like his picture, his face, drawn on the cover. He's like biting his lip and it's bleeding a little bit. It's just amazing. And I remember it said it was $1. So I went to buy it and I was like, is this only $1? And the guy was like, no, it says here in the book it's $3.50. And I was like, oh, okay. He's like, well, I'll give it to you for $1. I was like, oh, sweet. All right, I'll take it. And so, of course, I bought that. I bought the other issues. And, of course, my grandfather, is no longer with us, but he was big on haggling and making deals and stuff. And when he found out that I had, quote, haggled, close quote, to get the comic from $3.50 down to $1, he was like so proud of me for that. But anyway, I mean, that iconic cover, I love that. I think Roseanne, I want to say David on Roseanne wore a T-shirt with that cover on it. And so then in my newest novel, Mark in Sales, the main character, Mark, his son Ethan, is into comic books, and so is his girlfriend, Farrah. And Farrah is wearing her uncle's Lobo T-shirt that has that image on it. So I had to make a call back to that. So they were FaceTiming, talking about, because he's in a mountain town that I have in my books, and he had found Deadpool's first appearance for like a good price at a comic book shop and couldn't believe it. So he's like showing her on FaceTime and she was all excited for him, So remember, it was New Mutants 98, I think, was Deadpool's first appearance. So I don't know. I mean, obviously I looked it up before I wrote it in the book. So it's correct in the book, but in my head I have to remember. But anyway, point is, I think people are excited for Lobo to see what he's going to do. But again, like, what does it mean? He's in this for a few scenes. He kind of yucks it up a bit. He's fun. I mean, I think his first appearance is great because, he's out there looking for more of these Ravagers, and Ruthie's like, oh, we should go talk to him, and Supergirl's like, no, we don't talk to Lobo. Nobody talks to Lobo. Stay away from him. It's like the one guy that she's afraid of, even with her powers on a yellow sun planet, she doesn't want to deal with Lobo, which I thought was fantastic. I thought that was all really good. But yeah, I mean, I was trying to think if there's other stuff in this. I mean, again, I think the story is. I think this is all good. A good movie. I think it works. I don't know where anybody would have thought that this was a movie that had a budget of $170 million. This is not the movie that's going to. This was not going to pull in the $600 million. I don't think that the first Superman movie did. And so the question is, if this movie. I mean, and again, it could have caught lightning in a bottle. You never know. It could have caught lightning. I mean, and again, I don't think anybody thought it was going to make only $100 million. I think, maybe 500 million is maybe what they were expecting, 500 or 600 million, and they thought that'll get them to the church on time if they do 500 or 600 million. But they had to know when last year's Superman didn't make that much, when it only made like 600 million, that this one was going to do worse, right? It wasn't going to come, and it's kind of about where, percentage-wise, maybe about where it would be compared to that. Maybe again, I think it's doing worse than that. I think even 200 or 300 million is really where this should have probably landed, and it's just not. And I think it's the problem is that there's nobody to evangelize it because we all just liked it. We all just thought it was good. If somebody asked me and said, Matt, should I go see this in the theater? I'd say, yeah. But I probably would recommend the senior citizen matinees that I do, because I don't think you should spend a lot of money. I don't think it's worth that much money. But I think it's worth seeing in the theater. I think it's a fun movie, but I think it's got these flaws, and I think, I also don't think it's the movie's fault. I think it's, again, James Gunn trying to build out this Superman world that he wants to kind of have in place here. And I think, like, if I'm writing a novel and I'm writing a Superman novel and I do a chapter in the novel that's this movie here, it's not a big deal, right? Because you've got the whole book right there. You've read this first, my first 3 or 4 chapters that are the first movie. This movie's a couple chapters in the movie. It's like, some section in the movie or section in the novel. You read through this, you're happy enough with, hey, you like this Supergirl character, she seems cool. This Lobo character's interesting. Let's see what happens with him. You're gonna read on, the next couple chapters after that. But with a movie, it doesn't work that way, right? The movie has to stand alone. And I think maybe that's ultimately the problem with this, is that it's meant to be like a part of something else. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how to explain why it's doing so badly. I guess, yes, maybe I'm talking around this whole anti-woke thing, but I don't think that covers it either, because I think the anti-woke thing, these incel guys who won't see a movie that's either led by a black character, or a female character, or black female character, right, or Asian character, anything like that, right? That this idea that's out there. I'm not saying it's not out there for sure. These guys exist. That you can hear the double talk in some of the ones who don't want to be outed as an incel, where they come up with reasons why they didn't like this movie. And yes, it's definitely a non-zero factor, right? It has an effect. But I think there are a lot of people out there that watch movies like this that don't have that kind of mindset, that were looking forward to this and were hoping it was going to be good. And I think we still want to see what Millie Alcock can do as Supergirl. I think she's going to do some other stuff that's going to be good. I think this was way too much of a movie for comic book fans, but not just comic book fans. I think it was way too much of a movie for like modern new comic book fans. And one of the things that Feige did with the MCU is he brought in people who weren't comic book fans. He brought golden age of Hollywood movie fans that suddenly were addicted to Marvel movies and were watching them all. And I think that's the problem with this movie, is it didn't do that. And to some extent, I think that Supergirl from the mid-'80s did do that better. That movie used to be on cable a lot, or on TV, a lot, because, again, it was separate from the 4 Superman movies, so it didn't have the same licensing issues, I think. And so it was like these like local TV stations could play something attached to Superman on a weekend, and be able to afford it. And so that one was on a lot. And I think, with Helen Slater's performance and, Faye Dunaway's villain, which, you could say some of the things about how that character was written, but at least the way it was, it came off, I think that movie appeals, that movie does a better job for just a casual movie watcher than this movie does. This movie's really steeped in the comic book thing. The other thing, of course, is the whole outer space element of it, the space romp aspect to it. And, there are plenty of space romps, but we've been having trouble with some of those space romps. I mean, I think The Marvels also was a space romp movie that didn't do well either. And that one really underperformed. So that one had a smaller budget than this movie did, but it also made a little bit more than this one did. But, again, that was a space romp that just didn't work. And I think there's this idea that, well, James Gunn's got the secret sauce for a space romp because he did it with the Guardians of the Galaxy. That you can make that point, but I think the one thing we have to think about is that when James Gunn did the Guardians of the Galaxy, that first movie, yes, the Guardians of the Galaxy, that was a Marvel project or property that was just way down the list of again, I talked about how many times they tried to make it work and how badly it did. It never stuck, right? They were always trying to do Guardians of the Galaxy. But the thing is that when that movie was made, it came out in the middle of the second phase of the MCU. And so at that time, the MCU had really established what they were, with these characters that they had, but they'd also established their audience. I think, again, we talk about with Captain America, then into Avengers, and then Iron Man 3, they had established this real core audience. And so it doesn't mean that the Guardians of the Galaxy wasn't a great movie. But it was a movie that was sold to a specific audience that had already been well established by Kevin Feige, and they were receptive to see what this Guardians of the Galaxy thing was all about. It also had names in it that people were looking for, right? People, people like Chris Pratt, especially at that time. Zoe Saldana, people were fans of her. I think they liked the idea of, Bradley Cooper doing the voice of a raccoon. I think a lot of that stuff worked. Again, teasing Thanos, that was probably more for us comic book fans. I mean, again, I grew up reading the Infinity War comics, and so that was probably more for me. But I think there was an established audience there that movie played to perfectly and just sort of kept the momentum going, so that when they got into, now again, that Avengers Age of Ultron movie didn't do as well, Ant-Man doesn't do as well, and then they come out of the gates starting the third phase with Captain America Civil War. It's like they saw that their momentum was waning, and they come back and build something even bigger with the Captain America Civil War, where it's like, well, who's Captain America's villain going to be in this one? Oh, we'll make it Iron Man. We'll make it Superman, who we've established as Superman for the past however many movies. Our Superman is now going to fight our Batman, right? That was their, Batman versus Superman, I guess you could say. The Captain America was the Batman there's Iron Man, Superman. And so they had developed this all really well. And so, yeah, I think this movie here, it probably, maybe we needed Wonder Woman sooner. We needed, instead of waiting on Batman, but see, what do you do with Batman? Because you got the Chris Pattinson Batman going on too. So it's almost like James Gunn is in the same situation that Kevin Feige was before, where some of his characters are tied up in other things, like especially Batman, his biggest character. But I think if you had told Kevin Feige, hey, you've got Superman, but you don't have Batman yet, because we're going to figure out what to do with this Robert Pattinson thing. But you've also got Wonder Woman, and you've got Flash, and you've got Green Lantern. What are you going to do with it, right? He wouldn't be like, I'll start with Superman for sure. I got to do Superman. But yeah, I'll do Supergirl next. He'd probably be like, no, I'm going to do Wonder Woman next, right? We're going to blow away with a great Wonder Woman movie. Or maybe he does like Flash and Green Lantern, and Wonder Woman is that perfect fifth movie, the same way that Captain America was that perfect fifth movie, where you do like the historical movie, which again they did with Wonder Woman, and it worked really well. I don't know that Kevin Feige would have said, okay, Supergirl's my next movie. I don't know that he would have done it. You can also look at the original Supergirl. They had 3 Superman movies, and granted, they wanted Supergirl to be in Superman 3. That was the original plan, right? There was going to be Supergirl and Brainiac in Superman 3. And that probably would have been the perfect thing to do. Bring her in, or again, introduce her in the second Superman movie. But she just isn't established enough as a character. I looked her up on Wikipedia. She has no villains listed. She has no real lore. She was always kind of a fill-in character. I think that's why they chose Woman of Tomorrow as the basis for this film, because they had, what do I want to say? Because there wasn't a lot out there for Supergirl. There wasn't a lot to work with. She was kind of this adjunct to Superman kind of character, which I think that brings up another fascinating thing with DC, is that, they have more kind of bigger name female characters. But other than Wonder Woman, right, you've got Batgirl and Supergirl, who are kind of adjuncts to bigger names, right, like Superman and Batman, kind of the bigger, and there's sort of ways that they built out the universes within universes of Batman and Superman, whereas Wonder Woman is her own thing there. And that's an interesting thing when you kind of compare that to Marvel, because again, I don't know how far down the list you'd have to go with Marvel before you even get a really iconic female character. They tried to create it with Captain Marvel. Again with Black Widow. I think Storm is one that you could do a lot with. I don't know that she's got quite the cachet, but I think you could have done a lot. They could have done a lot with Storm. I think Fox should have been doing a lot with Storm, and they just didn't. Most of the really great female characters in Marvel are X characters, right, or X-Men characters, because Chris Claremont was creating a lot of them at that time. And then, I think the other thing too, of course, for me growing up as a fan, I grew up just after I was collecting just after the Claremont period. So you've got like Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld just drawing these really well-endowed female characters, and it kind of changed what Chris Claremont wanted with that, because he was wanting to sort of diversify and make the X-Men something that everybody could approach. And then Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld get a hold of those female characters, and suddenly it's just these big, massive chests and like these really nice, tight-fitting spandex clothes and stuff like that. And so it kind of took some of that part of it out of it. So I think I don't know. It's so the Marvel thing is a little bit different from DC, where DC you've got a lot of these characters. I mean, I could name other big strong female characters, but I think Wonder Woman I think is the biggest one, and I think. I know they're planning maybe 2028 for a Wonder Woman character, and I'm not saying this movie couldn't have been that. I don't know. I think maybe I don't know. I think they picked the wrong story. Again, I like the movie. This is like when I had Chris the Brain on to talk about Detention, and we both liked that movie, and we were destroying it for the entire time. I feel like I'm doing the same thing. I liked Supergirl. I enjoyed it, but I feel like I'm not destroying it. I'm trying to do a postmortem on why the movie is doing so poorly in the theater. I mean, they're talking like end of month to have it on HBO Max. And I mean, that's another thing that, now you're not going to get anybody to go see it, right? If you're going to say it's going to be on HBO Max in 3 weeks, it's going to be even less now. But I think if you're hearing this, if you've gotten to this point, if you've got time for a senior citizen matinee, this is a fun time. This movie will you'll enjoy yourself in this movie here. But I think, it's, I think people comparing it to like a James Gunn Guardians of the Galaxy style space romp, maybe, but I don't know if that's where we needed our James Gunn Guardians of the Galaxy style space romp. I think where it came in the MCU was the right time, and this might not have quite been the time for it here. Again, I think this is probably your better, what would I say, like your second Supergirl movie. We needed maybe more of an establishing with her, with an established villain, an established DC villain that we know. It could have been one of the myriad Superman villains. Bring in Mr. Mxyzptlk or whatever. You could have brought him in. Still could have had Lobo in it. I think and maybe you build more buzz with more characters in it. I think maybe they thought Lobo would be enough of a buzz, but Lobo is a comic book fan's buzz kind of character, right? He's a deep cut, more of a deep cut character. He's not the kind of character like even Iron Man. Iron Man isn't like one of the biggest Marvel characters, but if I say Iron Man to you, before that, you'd kind of in your head you'd see like a guy in a yellow and red suit or whatever. And I know too, the other thing is that when Kevin Feige was focus grouping on what characters that they wanted to lead this MCU that he was creating, he had some kids in a room, and Iron Man was the most fascinating to them because this idea of a guy who has no powers, and then he puts on this suit and has all these powers, was really fascinating. But it was like fascinating because the kids wanted to know, like, who is this guy in the suit that has this suit and is doing all of this stuff? And so then, of course, they bring it to life with Robert Downey Jr., and the thing takes off from there. But I think even Iron Man has, he has a little bit, he definitely has more than Lobo. I don't think he has more than Supergirl. I think Supergirl, more people would recognize her than Iron Man at that time, before 2008. But I don't know. It's a shame that this movie kind of is doing so badly here. And I think, I don't know that this should have been the second movie in James Gunn's film here. And again, now we got a body horror movie coming that's supposed to, like, maybe, tepidly introduce the Bat universe to us, because Clayface is a Batman villain. So I don't know. We'll see what happens there. Again, I'm probably not going to watch that one. So this is probably it for me for DC until, I guess, we got the next Superman movie coming out next year. So we'll see what happens there. So why don't we take a break here, and then when we come back, I will talk about Mark and Sales, give you some background on Mark and Sales. My newest book, Mark and Sales, is available now. It follows Mark, who, over the last 10 years, has turned himself into the best possible salesperson he can be. And in that time, he's made his family rich selling cut-rate health insurance to companies that are either looking to save a few bucks or don't know any better. The problem is, he's missed out on the lives of his wife and kids, and the employees of those companies he's sold insurance to now have to deal with higher medical bills and the loss of previously covered providers. As Mark comes to understand the reality of the product he's selling and the toll his long hours at work have taken on his relationship with his family, his company gives him the promotion he's always wanted. Can he now throw away everything he's worked so hard for to make a career change? Mark and Sales takes place in the same world as Chad in Accounting and explores what it means to be an adult in modern society, from family and career obligations to making sense of a changing world as time passes more quickly. You can get an Amazon and Kindle, Kindle Unlimited, and in paperback. The link is in the podcast description. All right, we are back, and I'm going to talk a little bit here about my newest book, Mark and Sales. This came up. ever since I first put out a book, which was Chad and Accounting, people would read it and they'd be like, man, where do you come up with some of these things? Where do you come up with these characters? Where do you come up with these ideas for the stories and all of that? And it's a variety of places, but it kind of, with each book, as people read them, they're wondering, like, well, where did that idea come from? Or where did you think of that? And so when it came up this time again with Mark and Sales, Rich Haas, who'd read it, which, again, thank you to him for reading it, and everybody who reads my novels. I always appreciate people who are out there reading them. He was like, why don't you just talk about it on your podcast? And I was like, yeah, all right, that actually is a good idea. We can kind of use this second half here because, again, I already talked about Superman, last year's Superman, on episode 220 with Freddie Young. So there's kind of this second half of an episode here that we could use to talk about that. So, Mark and Sales, of course, Chad and Accounting, that was, it's my first novel that I published, self-published on Amazon, and what they call it, KDP now is what the term was. It was I guess it wasn't CreateSpace when I was doing it. When I was looking into it, it was CreateSpace. But anyway, first novel that I wrote, and I'm actually planning on getting that one out later this year, is called 29. And it was kind of just me as a young, it's like I was in my 20s writing that one. And I wrote it kind of throughout the early 2000s and tried to publish it, tried to get on with an agent, that kind of thing. And of course, it wasn't going anywhere. And I look back on it, there were some reasons for that. It just wasn't all that well written. But then, ideas started for Chad and Accounting kind of around that time. When I had finished 29, I was looking to sell it off, or try to get somewhere with it. I'd written this short story about this incel-like character that was Chad, who was like a guy at his office who's always striking out with women. And the short story ended up being long. It ended up being long for a short story, so I thought, well, what can I do with that? And two other things kind of happened in that time where I had two other kind of short story idea, or one was a short story idea where it's kind of, I don't think it's the third chapter in Chad Accounting, called The Two Haleys. Someone I knew whose name was Casey, and then there was a elderly couple, the retirement community I worked in, also named Casey, where something similar happened to them, kind of both their lives. It's similar to what happens in Chad and Accounting. And so I started writing that short story and realized, actually, that would make a good second chapter to Chad and Accounting. And then I met somebody who was telling a story that in second chapter of Chad and Accounting, Chad encounters a young woman that he kind of has a thing with, that she gets really drunk and she urinates in her purse. And somebody was telling a similar story where they got wasted, that they had done that. I was like, okay, that's a perfect chapter. And that ended up being my second chapter. So, I'm kind of putting these chapters together, and I write Chad and Accounting. And one of the things about Chad and Accounting was that, one, he was an accountant at an insurance company, and he essentially leaves the insurance company. When he leaves that, he joins a hedge fund as their fund managers, person handling the accounting for it. His whole life sort of changes, and he kind of comes out of the doldrums that he's living in, and he starts to live a happier life. So that insurance company, I like the idea of that insurance company, but the thing is, because of Chad, it being a dreary place for him, seeing it through his eyes, it was always a place that I wasn't building out that much in there. It was always kind of a place that was just sort of, he would go there and his soul would be leaving his body and he would want to get out of there as soon as possible. So that was kind of how I did, it was depicted in the story. It wasn't really built out that much. But the other thing is, I don't know how it happened, but as I was writing that novel, there was a sense that I wanted to take place in New Hampshire, but there's limits to New Hampshire that I didn't want limiting my book. So New Hampshire, one, is not overly populated. It doesn't have, so like from a city standpoint, like it doesn't, its biggest city I think is Manchester, and it's like maybe 100,000 people. And I wanted like kind of a bigger city with suburbs and things like that in it. So it was kind of this fictitious area that I didn't really name anything, and it was still in New England. But there was a sense of like, okay, I could still do more with this world that I created here. And so then I had this idea of, okay, I'll make Chad and Accounting into a trilogy of Mark and Sales, and then the third one that I haven't written yet, but I'm still kind of conceiving, Todd and Recruitment. And so Mark and Sales, there was the idea of what of wanting to do something like Mark and Sales. And then there were a few things that kind of converged at that time that sort of built Mark and Sales out. One, I read the novel Something Happened. By Joseph Heller. So you probably know Joseph Heller from Catch-22, but also he wrote Something Happened is about a guy who is kind of living this sort of suburban, corporate existence. He's got a wife, 3 kids, and but he's also cheating on his wife, but he's making his way up the corporate ladder, but it's also a bit soul-crushing for him, and he's not always like the most the biggest fan of it. But there's a sense of me wanting to do something with that. Like I wanted a character making their way up the corporate ladder who, maybe isn't as living this sort of this life with a family, which again, I don't have any kids, so I was going to have to kind of build off of this story and sort of try to come up with it the best I could for that kind of thing. So that was the one thing. And then my wife, her favorite show is Mad Men, and she introduced me to Mad Men. So again, I'm coming with this idea of this something happened, Mark in sales. I started watching Mad Men and realized like, oh, well, Mark should be Don Draper, right? He should that's what I want there. And of course, I'm also seeing more of the machinations of kind of the corporate world, the internal conflicts that happen there. So I've gotten some of it from Something Happened, even though that was in both of these are taking place in the 60s, right? So now I've got to sort of modernize this. And it just happened in the early 2000s. I got a promotion of my job, and I was managing other staff. And so I was doing these in-services where I was learning about all of these different things about sort of the dynamics of management and that kind of thing. So now I was able to kind of put that into it as well. And so that's where I've got this story of this character, Mark, who's like this sales machine, who's like really good at sales, but also he kind of looks the part the way Don Draper does. So like kind of whenever he goes into a sales meeting, the people that he's selling to automatically want to be sold to, right? He kind of exudes that vibe. And then it was a matter of like, okay, now I've got to build out his family. And I was kind of going based off of the Joseph Heller model, though. In his case, I think the daughter was older, then there was the son was younger. Then there was also somebody who was developmentally, his third son was developmentally delayed, or his third child was developmentally delayed. And that was kind of a whole thing in the story because it was almost like they didn't want anything to do with that son. It was really, really kind of a sad part of the story, but also it was very kind of brutalist the way that Joseph Heller handled that. And I was like, I don't want anything to do with that in the story. So I didn't even put any element like that in there. So it was just the two kids. And I figured 2 kids would be enough to handle anyway. I thought, 3 kids would be a lot to kind of build out. Because, again, they're going to each have their own little element of the story to play where they're interacting with their father. And of course the wife as well, who's Becky. And so then it's a matter of kind of figuring out how do I want to start this story. And I don't know why, but I decided to start the story with Becky and Mark picking up their son Ethan from the police station after being busted smoking weed. And so it's an interesting way to introduce him because he's kind of more just a dad, and he's not used to being a dad, and he's not used to just being an adult as it is. He's realizing that he's in this circumstance with his son where the police officer's talking to him as the father, and the police officer's seeing him as the adult in this situation and understanding there's a responsibility that Mark needs to take about this. And Mark is looking at it as like, oh, I've got to be an adult here. And it's kind of an interesting way to introduce him because everybody else around Mark sees him as the man, right? They see him as this ultimate adult who is always just getting things done and taking care of things. But in his head, he never really became that. It just sort of just happened for him. And so that's sort of how we build him out, that he's just like, okay, he meets Becky, they get married, they have kids, and there are these signposts that he's just supposed to kind of meet as he's going along, and he's kind of just going through his life that way. And then he meets Chad from the first book. He goes out to eat with him because Chad's girlfriend is I think they end up getting married. Their wife. She went to high school with Becky as well, so they both went to high school with Becky. So they all go out to eat together, and he's really inspired by Chad because, again, Chad worked at the insurance company that he was working at as a salesperson. And he's like, I don't recognize this Chad from the kind of the dullard who kind of wasted away through, it was like this miserable dullard that nobody wanted to deal with. I don't recognize this as this person now who's completely cleaned up and is sharp and is making all this money. How can I do that? How can I be this person? But unlike Chad, who leaves the insurance company to become this person, Mark stays and becomes this person within the insurance company by becoming the greatest salesperson that they've had, and probably kind of infamous within the state when it comes to selling insurance. Now, one of the things I did take a liberty with is that generally the way health insurance is sold in America is through brokers. Brokers will sell it between insurance companies and businesses that need to provide insurance to their employees. I changed that where Mark and the people that work under him, they're selling directly from the insurance company. And I make a little comment about it where he says, "Oh, it's people trust us more because we represent the company as opposed to a broker." But it really it just worked better in the story for me to do it that way. So probably somebody who is in insurance reading that is going to be like, "Oh, that's not true. That's not really how that works." But then so from there, it's a matter of as I'm writing this story. First, developing the ideas for what's going to happen. So I kind of map out the chapters. So we've got a chapter where we get introduced to his wife, Becky, and it's a sense of like, okay, well, how do I introduce her? And the way I kind of do it is that she, I shouldn't say kind of, the way I do it is that she finds one of her old CDs in her daughter Peyton's room. She finds Mazzy Star's, I can't remember what the name of that album was. It's correct in the novel because I looked it up. But, the one that had Fade Into You on it, And so, and again, these characters are all born in the late 70s like me. So they kind of grow up with a similar, Mark, I think his character was born in 76. And then Becky, I think, was 78. Or 77. So they're roughly my age, but they grow up with similar things. So like, she is remembering going to Lilith Fair and all of that. And of course he remembers going to Lollapalooza. So, so there's all of those touch points there, but it's like, okay, sort of giving her a story arc within the story itself, so it's the book is ultimately about Mark, but then you kind of have these other characters that have their own mini arcs or kind of, in Becky's case, she has an arc that kind of goes throughout the novel as well. One of the things I find too is so I create characters as I'm going, and then maybe you go through a read through and realize like, oh, that character really wasn't that fleshed out, and I think that's like one of the things with Mark's initial boss. So when we start the novel, Mark is a manager, but he's got a director above him, and so that character, I initially wrote him just as this kind of the schlubby director guy that like kind of gets into his position based off the back of Mark's sale. So he's not really any good at doing his job. It's just that he was Mark's manager when Mark was hired. So then when Mark gets really great sales, they reflect well on him, and he gets the director's job when that is open, when it's available for somebody to take. And I think the first couple of read-throughs, I didn't give him a lot. And I was like, okay, I got to give him a backstory. So like his backstory is that, he was born in the late 50s. He was working at a car dealership when he got out of school. Then the owner of the car dealership was busted for selling coke. So then he had to find something else. And he's kind of bouncing between things like, selling water beds, stuff that would kind of be age appropriate for that time that he would have been coming up. And then he gets into what was the old insurance company before the big conglomerate bought it. That's the other piece of it, right? Is that kind of thing. And so it's sort of building it out in these vignette ways. And this thing where, the manager or his original boss is like, man, it would have been nice to just keep staying in this job and just making money the way we're making. But Mark had to keep pushing, right? Mark had to keep going for it, and it exposed everything. And suddenly I was out of, where Mark kind of gets the promotion when he takes over from, the boss. And I don't think I'm giving too much away there because it's kind of established early on that this is going to happen within like the first chapter or two. That one comes right out of Something Happened. In Something Happened, the main character in that, he's approached by one of the higher-ups, and they're like, yeah, we got to let so-and-so go. And it's like, I don't know if it was his manager or like a colleague of his, but it kind of happens exactly. It's pretty close to it. I mean, I obviously I changed it to fit within the story here, but the inspiration definitely came from there. How he gets moved out and all of that. But yeah, a lot of the machinations that go on inside the office, those kinds of things, those are things that even me working remotely, I could kind of see them, sort of see how some of them played out. And then sometimes it's just, sort of reading things, like, Mark's character reads Harvard's Business Review. I was reading that, when I was working as a manager. So I was pulling stories from that as well. But yeah, I think it's just, thinking about like, I don't know, like, thinking about like the character Mark, like, okay, he's got his wife, he's got his kids. Who else is going to be in his life? Well, he's got to have friends from high school, right? Everybody's got to have friends. So I was trying to think, how would I make his friends be successful in a slightly different way from him, but also in a way that might even expose him as something, someone who was kind of floating by. And so these friends of his that become more successful. So one friend, his friend JD, we have a cat JD, which I don't think I had a name because to be fair, JD comes up in a book I wrote called Holtman Arms, which has our cat Brando play a part. Our late cat Brando has a part of that. So JD ends up in that. Our cat as a person. JD he becomes a famous, not famous, but he becomes a Major League Baseball umpire, right? So he kind of reaches that pinnacle there, and then Mark's friend Lane, he owns his own bike shop that he's successful with up in the mountains. And so it's like two separate kinds of success, but compared to Mark, who's just kind of floating by and selling office supplies or medical supplies. That's what he does before he goes into the insurance business. Right, like he's just kind of floating by while they're becoming really successful at their two things. And then suddenly he becomes even more successful than them, right? So there's this way that he sort of passes them. But sort of looking at what success can be in different ways and having these different friends who kind of, shape that. And then, of course, he also has siblings. So he has a brother, Will, who died in Iraq. So it's another piece that you can kind of, again, looking at success and kind of pairing it, separately, somebody dying for their country. I don't think, I don't know think that necessarily a success, but I think the time before he would have died, that, again, during the Iraq War period where we were venerating our service people to such a degree that, that was something that would have been seen as a really big thing. But then also he has a sister who, again, an older sister who just kind of has a nice, comfortable life with her husband. And so doesn't have a lot of the worries that Mark has in trying to grow in his company. So again, seeing success reflected in different ways, that way. And then of course he has his kids that he's interacting with. So the son, Ethan, is kind of just kind of a loner. He's got a girlfriend that he spends a lot of time with. He's into comics and stuff and is really uncomfortable around his father. And so they go away for a week, and when Mark has to go to do kind of do some in services for customers, and that's when the son picks up the Deadpool comics and all of that. They have like a bonding moment where he's watching the Patriots at one point and kind of trying to introduce his son to that, and he's just kind of not sure how to handle it. And then the daughter Peyton, she kind of also wants to spend time with her father, and it's distressed by the fact that he's always gone. But she is into Sonia Rostova, which Sonia Rostova, if you don't know, that's my second novel, Girl in a Gun. I introduced this character, Elaine Laughlin, who reads War and Peace and felt like Sonia Rostova got a raw deal. So she creates what would then fanfic, but becomes this huge series of vampire hunter lit movie books where Sonia Rostova goes on after War and Peace to become a vampire hunter, and there's this huge young adult lit series that's like the next Harry Potter. And so of course Mark's daughter is really into that. He takes her to a convention of that, and they kind of bond over that. But again, it's this thing where he sort of connects with his family, and then suddenly the promotions come, and now he's doing more. He's busy more and all of that. And then, of course, the third component, beyond the inter-office interactions, there's, of course, the insurance that he's selling. And so that's a piece of it, too, where initially you just see Mark selling insurance to people. And you see the process that he goes through. He goes in the door and he can recognize somebody who knows they've sold him right away. Now it's all these techniques he uses. Like, okay, maybe he'll charge a certain price and then let them haggle him down to what the actual price is supposed to be, and because it kind of gets that makes them feel like they worked for it, as opposed to him just selling them whatever they want, things like that he does. So we kind of see that part, but then what we start to see as the novel goes on is that these companies that he's selling insurance to, the customers, because it's cut rate health insurance that he's selling, these customers start to lose providers. They start to have issues. And it really comes to a head later in the book when one of the major insurance companies pulls out of the state, and he just, because he's such a massive sales machine, just goes in with him, and he's got his salespeople working under him, and they just kind of sweep through the state and just buy up all of the, or essentially claim all of the customers that were left by this other company, and suddenly everybody's getting bad insurance, and it becomes this huge news story in the state where everybody's losing providers, having to pay extra for things. But you see snippets of it early on. When Mark visits Lane, he's with his son, and Lane's like, "Yeah, I'm not ever going to get your insurance because one of my customers was riding his bike and he got into an accident and the provider wasn't covered. He had your insurance and he had to pay $15,000 to get his hip fixed or something like that." And then like the son who's there, the two sons, because Lane's got a son too, they're kind of more up on these things, and they're talking about how every other country has single payer, every other developed nation has single payer. Why do we even have single payer? And the moment where the son is at a convenience store with his dad and he sees a 4-year-old's picture on a donation jar, and he's like, well, what's the deal? Don't they have insurance? Like, your insurance, would that cover the child's cancer treatments? Well, there's reasons why it might not cover it, things like that. He's like, well, what's the point then? What's the point of having insurance if it's not going to cover the baby's health insurance? So there's you get the snippets of it, and then it just kind of grows further on. So we start meeting more people who, Mark doesn't necessarily know what their backstory is, but I kind of tell it. Like, okay, this person had self-harm and ideation, but they were used to their psychiatrist that they were working with, and then the company that Mark sells insurance to, now that now there's a new insurance company, the provider's not covered, and now this young woman's like trying to at a crisis point as a result. So those kind of layers that you have in there as well. I kind of just sort of sprinkle. They start kind of small and then they grow, and so then it gets to that point where what does Mark do? Does he keep this job or not? And again, he gets to a point where he kind of gets really high up in the company, and he's going to what is he going to do with that kind of thing? So it is one of those things where I think again, you go into it with a basic idea of where you want to put things and how you want things to go, and then as you're writing it and you realize certain characters maybe aren't fleshed out more, you could do more with those characters and sort of how to say, you can build their stories out even more as well. You can give them a paragraph here or there that fleshes things out. I think there's Mark has two people working under him. So there's one who's Taryn, and then Harper, right? Taryn and Harper, who are kind of like younger people working under him and learning under him. And now Taryn was based kind of on a person who worked for one of the sports channels here in Philadelphia, Taryn Hatcher, because I remember she was on Twitter and she posted a picture of herself and saying like, oh, we'll be doing the Flyers post game at a certain time, and she got all these kind of gross comments, and I was like, oh, that could be kind of the character that I would want in an office setting, dealing with kind of like gross male coworkers. That was kind of the idea there, and I thought, okay, I could maybe pull that off. But then, of course, again, it's one of those situations where you start with a character like that, kind of in that mode, and then you say, okay, what can I do with that character? And suddenly she becomes this really capable salesperson. As I'm developing her throughout the story, she's one of the best salespeople that they have, and so that I can build that arc out more and kind of do other things with her character. Like, okay, so her character has a crush on Mark, but at the same time she wants to be respected as a salesperson, and so you can kind of do all of those kinds of things there. But you start with it as like a, okay, this, yes, Taryn Hatcher character would be great, getting, dealing with these gross male characters that she's working with, same way in Twitter, and then you kind of build it out from there. The other character, Harper, he was this interesting character where, again, I kind of like this idea of him idolizing Mark and wanting to be like the best salesperson working under him. But then, sort of developing that character out more where there's rumors that Mark and Taryn are having an affair. And it's like, then maybe I could, have Harper respond to that. How would he respond to that? Would he emulate it, right? Or would he have less respect for Mark, right? that kind of thing. But the other thing, of course, is that when Mark starts to get promoted, a new director takes over. Who, again, he's based partially off of was it Duck Phillips? Was that his name in Mad Men? But also partially based off this manager that I had, who, when my manager that left, they brought in this new guy who was really toxic. And so I kind of brought some of those toxic elements in there. And I kind of put myself in Harper's place for a little bit there and kind of, brought from my own experience kind of what Harper was going through when Mark gets a promotion outside of the office and Harper's dealing with this new director who's toxic. I took some of that from my own experience there and was able, kind of, in a way it's a little bit cathartic when you're dealing with that kind of thing, but I kind of put some of that in there as well. I mean, the other thing, of course, is that Harper is, in a way, sort of a juxtaposition between Mark's real son and him. And similar to like Taryn is sort of a juxtaposition between his real daughter, Peyton, and her, his work daughter in a way. So you've got those juxtapositions in there as well that you can do some things with. And again, it's not quite apples to apples because again, Taryn has a crush on Mark, and Mark, I think, there's elements there where he might have feelings for her as well, but you kind of see as you go through the book what happens there with that. So it's not apples to apples as daughter versus daughter. There's still other elements in there, and of course they're also not quite young enough to be his kids. It's similar, I guess, maybe to Don Draper with Sally Draper, right? Or not to Sally Draper, with Elizabeth Holmes. I can't remember the Elizabeth Moss's character. Elizabeth Holmes. She's the Theranos person or whatever. But Elizabeth Moss's character. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on her name. But anyway, you know what I mean. Like there's that sort of that element there as well. So again, you're sort of drawing these juxtapositions, but also kind of seeing how they play out. And again, Harper was a character that he was just there. He was just there to kind of idolize Mark's character. And I was like, well, no, I got to give him more, right? So I give him a wife that just had a baby. So that works out well, right? That he's got to go home to his wife that just had a baby. And I actually made some scenes with the wife. And so then you get a sense of like, okay, you get more of a sense of who he is. And also seeing the toll that it's taking on his wife, that now by emulating Mark, he's staying at the office more. And that's an issue for her as well. So you have those elements there too. I mean, and you start to kind of build out more of these characters that he's working with. So there's Allie, there's another woman that works in their department. He's teaching how to sell as well, and again, it's also sort of trying to build out this world, because now we built it out somewhat in Chad and Accounting, so now we'll build it out more here, and kind of make it more suburban. I think that's really the biggest key, is to make it as suburban as possible. So you've got one point he takes Allie to eat after they went on some sales calls. They go to a Chinese restaurant that used to be a Pizza Hut, right? So you kind of you have that imagery in your head of what that's supposed to look like. So all kinds of things like that as well. I mean, I think I've gone on for about 25 minutes here. I was trying to think if there's anything else that that I talk about in terms of how I come up with these things. I think what the third book would be, if I do a third book, the Todd and recruitment book, I think that one would explore kind of the outsourcing, because again, recruitment for the healthcare, or sorry, the health insurance company, recruitment for that was call center recruitment. So because one of the things that happens early on in the book is that Mark foists one of his low performing employees or team members on the call center recruitment team, and of course they discover how bad it's the guy Kurt, how bad he is at the time. But call center recruitment essentially is people that have to answer the phone, right, when people are calling and complaining about the bad health insurance they're getting. You've got so imagine a lot of churn and burn there, right, when you're getting that kind of thing. So what I want to do is maybe combine like both some outsourcing going on there, maybe with some AI replacement work, and so that's maybe where I'd be going with that one. So I'm still kind of mapping out what I want that to be. And again, you just never know too where inspiration is going to come from, because again, I knew I wanted to do Mark in sales, but then I read something happen. I'm like, okay, that's really all I want to take Mark in sales. And then I watch Mad Men, and I see a lot of something happened in Mad Men. I think that I feel like that had to have been a big inspiration for Matthew Weiner as well. So it just kind of dovetailed really well there. So there's probably inspirations right now that I haven't even thought about that are going to inspire me when it comes to writing Todd and recruitment in the next few years or so, whenever that comes out. Because you think about it, so I wrote Chad and Accounting. I started in like 2009. And I didn't publish it until 2020, but I had probably finished it for the most part I think it was in 2014. And then when I moved down here to Philadelphia, I left a lot of that stuff. Listening to this, if you're a podcaster or a blog fan, you know that there was that hiatus that I went through between 2015 and 2019. I had picked up the novel again a little bit before then and started writing again a little bit before then. So I kind of went on a hiatus for everything. And then 2018, I wrote A Girl and a Gun, and it was like, oh, okay, I can write another novel, right? And I wrote it quicker than I wrote Chad and Accounting. So then it was a matter of fixing up Chad and Accounting while writing other things. Like I wrote, Holtman Arms in 2019, Don's House in the Mountains. That was like a challenge to see if I could do 4,000 words a day each day when the pandemic started in April. And I did. I made it through the entire month of April writing 4,000 words a day. It was kind of a mess, but I did it. That time, but I realized in 2020, I was like, Chad and Accounting is good enough right now that I can publish it. I should put it out there. And of course, the thing was, when I published it, a lot of friends and family were like, "Oh, Matt wrote a novel. That's crazy. I got to buy that." And then when I put out A Girl and a Gun a year later, they're like, "Wait a second, you did another book? Okay, well, all right, well, we'll get that one too." And then Holtman Arms like, "Wait, okay, this is going to be an every year thing. All right, I don't know if we can keep up with that." So, the sales, the family and friends sales start to decline. But what I'm seeing now is that there's more of an audience now, that people are coming to read these books, which I appreciate, and it's sort of stabilized. So again, those initial big sales that I got for Chad Accounting that were all friends and family, excited about the novelty of buying a book that I wrote, that's kind of died off. But now it's more people that are just interested in reading them. And so again, I appreciate the feedback that people have given about Mark in sales, that they're enjoying it. It is available on paperback, Kindle Unlimited. I'm seeing someone right now is reading it on Kindle Unlimited, or no, they're reading Holtman Arms on Kindle Unlimited, because I can track my sales, and so Kindle Unlimited, you can see like, how many pages somebody reads. I get paid per page. So if you've got Kindle Unlimited and you read one of my books, I get paid based on how many pages of it you read. So if you don't finish it, I get something for it. But but either way, I always appreciate people wanting to buy my books and check them out. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you have if you pick up one of my books and you're reading it and you have questions about things. Let me know. I might do more of these kinds of things. Maybe on some of my other books to get people interested in those as well. Because, again, the back catalog, right, it still exists out there for people to read, so they can always check that out too. But again, so why don't we'll take a break here quickly, and then when I come back, I will talk about the World Cup a little bit here. It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. All right. We're back, and we're going to wrap here. I wanted to say a few words about the World Cup, just because I talk about international soccer on the podcast quite a bit. It comes up, especially with Scott Murphy from All 90s Action all the time, because he's a big fan as well. But I figured with what's going on with the World Cup, I had to say a little bit, because I think part of it is because it is the U.S. that's involved in these controversies. It almost kind of feels like I'm dodging it if I don't talk about it. And I was realizing, like, okay, I was going to maybe just say a couple words at the beginning, but I realized as well that it's not just a couple words. That, like, if I start talking about soccer like this, it could be, could go on for a bit. So why don't we just stick it at the end? If people want to listen to it, they can. And if not, they don't have to worry about it. Also, just the term soccer itself, I will be honest, I don't like the term soccer. I do think football is the better term. But if I use football to describe soccer as an American, I think I sound like Jennifer Coolidge on Friends. I don't know if you remember Jennifer Coolidge's character on Friends, where she went to England for a period, then came back, and suddenly she was calling garage a garage and stuff like that. And so, calling soccer football, unfortunately, it does sound like I'm saying garage instead of garage. And if you're from England, if you're from the UK, yes, you could say that, because you're meant to say that. But here you sound like you're, I don't know, is it putting on airs is the right term? But by the same token, I think there are certain terms in UK English that just work better. Like, we don't really have a good equivalent to the UK cheek, right? Like the cheek of that person. I mean, you can say the nerve of that person, but it doesn't quite land the same way. It doesn't encapsulate exactly what you want when you're trying to say the cheek of somebody, to do something, or that took a lot of cheek or something, like we don't really have an equivalent for that. And so I don't know. So there are some ways it's better to use UK English, but I think obviously football makes more sense. It's one of the few times where American English is more, what do I want to say? Like, I don't know, obtrusive. I don't know, or obtuse. I don't know if that's the word I want, but it usually with American English, right? When we say something, it is what it is, right? So like in the UK, they say pavement, we say sidewalk, right? Well, it is what it is. We walk on that side. That's the side that we walk on, the sidewalk, right? I guess windshield and windscreen are kind of the same, but it's still kind of, I don't know, windshield, right? It's shielding me from all that stuff, whereas a screen might kind of let things through or something like that. I don't know. But usually, right, when we the terms that we use are kind of more literal. That's maybe the term I wanted, more literal. But when it comes to football, actually, that's not the case, right? American football, what we call football is not really that literal, because you only use your feet as a last resort in American football, right? And when I say foot, you only use the foot to ball, I should say. You only kick the ball. Use your feet with the ball as a last resort, whether you have to punt or you're kicking a field goal because you're settling for a field goal. You don't want to score a touchdown. Whereas soccer, the sport that the rest of the world calls football, you're literally using your feet, 90% of the time. And so that's the sport that should be called football. But just the reality, here in America, we wanted to be different. We didn't want to follow football as a sport. So we named another sport football, and we called what everybody else called football soccer. So anyway, I probably spent too long on that tangent. But anyway, getting into the World Cup here. Obviously, I'm just going to get out of the way right away that I didn't think that Balogun should have played in that game. I don't think he should have. He was suspended because going into the tournament, going into the World Cup, the rules were established that if you get a red card, you miss the next game. That was an established rule, and you can't go back on that rule. Now, yes, Balogun didn't deserve a red card for what he did. That wasn't a red card infraction. And I think that goes to a difference in how the rest of the world does tournament sports and the way the United States does tournament sports, because I think because the rest of the world have regular season champions. So, like, Arsenal this past year, they lose the FA Cup, but they win the championship because they had the most points for the regular season, right? So that's the championship, and the cup is something different. In American sports, right, what would happen is that after that, that regular season was done, you would have had a tournament. You would have had essentially maybe not what the FA Cup is, because the FA Cup is all the teams in England. But you would have had a tournament with maybe the top 8 teams, and they would have played each other. And it's possible that Arsenal would have lost that, right? Because maybe if they had to go head-to-head against Man United or Man City, right? They were losing against Man City head-to-head. Man City would have come out on top and won the championship. But one of the things, because of that, because we place so much importance on the tournament being the only thing, right, that there is no regular season champion, we have this mindset that referees should be more lax when they're officiating a game. That the last thing you want to do is remove a player from a game or suspend them. Whereas it seems like in sort of the world or international sporting, especially when it comes to soccer, that with these tournaments in particular, these international tournaments, people feel like the games should be officiated more strictly. That no, you need to be on your best behavior. It shouldn't be a matter of we'll let more things go. It's more about if you're not on your best behavior, we're gonna be more likely to give you a red card than we normally would. And I think that's part of it, is that no American is going to think that a player should be red carded for something beyond, Suarez, right? When he, used his hand to keep a ball out of, when he's playing Ghana, when Uruguay is playing Ghana, and he used his hand to knock the ball out, right? That's like a red cardable offense. It's beyond that, or biting people, like he was biting people, that too, right? Beyond that, we would think, okay, unless you really do something really bad, you shouldn't be kicked out of a game. And so that was a red card, not just our player, but I think in general, if we're watching a game, we wouldn't want to see a player get kicked out for something like that. Now, I should say the exception, of course, is when it comes to laundry. American sports fans, just like other parts of the world, they are really big on laundry. I mean, you listen to it in New England, it's like, if the Patriots would do something in a game, it would be perfectly fine. But if another team does it, what are they doing? That's horrible. The refs don't care. The refs are fixing the games because they don't like the Patriots. Roger Goodell's out to get us. That kind of thing. But for the most part, in American sports, we think that the game should be officiated more in a more lax manner when you get into the playoffs. Whereas it seems like in the world sports, they're more strict on that kind of thing. So again, I don't think he should have gotten the red card, but because he got the red card, he shouldn't have been able to play. That's just a given. That should be the case. So the fact that Trump put his thumb on the scale and got him back in the game, I don't know. I don't think bad karma is the right term. I just think it was bad all around. It was bad form. It shouldn't have happened. Belgium had a right to feel aggrieved. The rest of the world had the right to be like, we're all rooting against America. I think probably everywhere other than the Congo probably rooted against America. I think Congo probably still has a bone to pick with Belgium, if I were to guess, but probably everywhere else in the world was rooting for Belgium to beat the United States. And I think that I totally agree with that. I think that was perfectly fine. Now, what I think happened for me when it comes to that game between the United States and Belgium is I think Donald Trump doing that doomed the U.S. to lose that game. Now, I don't think it's a karma thing. I don't, you can believe in karma, and I think, if you believe in karma, then the U.S. got their karmic retribution there, and I think that's true. But the way I look at it is, Belgium, this is Belgium's golden generation, and they have been underperforming in world tournaments quite a bit. I mean, I think they underperformed in the European championship. I think, what did they lose to England in the last one of those? But also in the World Cup, they just haven't. This golden generation hasn't quite lived up to that standard. And you look at like Romelu Lukaku. I mean, he dominated in Serie A last year. Not this most recent, but the season before when Napoli won. People thought he was done, that he was cooked, and he goes and plays for Napoli. And he and that squad, they won the Scudetto there. So it's not like this wasn't there. This wasn't in them. But they were known for I don't say choking. I don't think choking is the right term. I think they were known for underperforming. And this game would have been ripe for an underperformance if you think about it. If Balogun had been suspended and he was kept suspended. So on the U.S. side, we lost our best player through some fugazi red card that some overly officious ref gave, who had a history of, I guess he had a match fixing scandal in the past. So, all those kind of things, right? It's like, okay, we got to rally around our player who's not there, right? And you come out and you really play well. Now, to be fair, I mean, the U.S. team, they looked really good against Paraguay. They looked really good in the first half against Australia, but they've had a lot of switch-off moments. I think they look good. I think they looked good when Balogun was sent off with a red card. They looked good after that. They kind of went forward, scored that second goal. So they've had their moments, but they've also been kind of underperforming at points as well. But I think they rally around Balogun. At the same time, you've got a Belgium team that's used to underperforming, who is looking at the U.S. saying, they don't even have their best player, right? Balogun's out. This will be easy, right? We'll take care of them. They go in playing lethargic, and maybe you get like a 1-1 draw that the U.S. ekes out on penalties, or maybe it's like 1-1, and then there's like a crazy bounce or an own goal or something like that, and the U.S. gets one in there, and they kind of eke out a 2-1 upset win, right? It was all there. It was all there in the making. But the moment Trump got Balogun back in that game, Belgium's the switch flipped on for Belgium, and they just went for it. And you saw that was that golden generation of Belgium that we've been watching for years, wondering when they were really going to show up. They showed up there, right? They just took it to the U.S. and crushed them. And so I do think, what you call it karma, or in my mind, I think it's just that they awoke a sleeping giant. Now, how Belgium's going to do? I think they're playing England in the next game. I'm not sure if I want to say that's who it is. Which I think England probably. They may after this game they may kind of come back down to earth, and we might see more of the usual Belgium. But who knows? This might kick kick them into gear. I don't know how they'll do against France. I think France is in their bracket as well. So we'll see. Right now, as we're recording, as I'm recording this, France is playing Morocco. So you never know there. But I don't know how Belgium would do against France. But still, the point is that I think they were ripe for an upset, and the U.S. was ripe to give them that upset, and then all went out the window once Trump put his thumb on the scale. Now, I think overall, the World Cup here in America, it started off as a complete embarrassment. I think, obviously Trump's immigration policies led to one referee from Somalia not being able to enter the country. The Iranian team has to fly in from Mexico to do their games and fly back out. Fans of teams in West Africa and other parts of the world, they can't even come see their team. So you get like situations like, France is playing Senegal, and, the only Senegalese fans are the ones who live in Harlem, in Petite Senegal, that nobody else, they can't, friends and family can't come, and they've spent money and put out money for hotels and things like that. And so there was that kind of initial feel. The other thing is, we were hearing all these reports that tickets weren't being sold, hotels weren't being booked. I know for me, someone who watches a lot, goes to a lot of sporting events, especially here in Philadelphia. I'm used to seeing a lot of different patterns. Like, for example, the Sixers this past year played the Golden State Warriors. Golden State Warriors star player Steph Curry was injured, and so those were tickets that were like over $100 when the season started. But then as we got closer to the game and realized, okay, Steph's not going to be playing, now the tickets were going down to like $10 or $15. And what you see in circumstances like that is that the Sixers will have a price that they put on their games. Like maybe like the cheapest ticket is $50 or something like that, $40, something, I don't know. And when they start to realize they're not selling those cheapest tickets, instead of reducing the price on their own website, they dump the tickets in groups on resellers like SeatGeek. And so then they kind of pressure test the system to see like what numbers can we charge. And so initially they might put them out there at like $30 and 20, And so for me, having seen this a lot of times, I know that if I just keep watching, and I think I got in the door for like $15, or maybe it was even cheaper than that. It might have been like 11 to go see that game. So you kind of watch that, and I was seeing similar things happen with the World Cup games here in Philadelphia. So there was one game that I had targeted. It was Curacao versus Cote d'Ivoire. And it was like around $200. I'm like, okay, I think that thing can get lower. And there was a lot of talk about the bottom falling out on tickets, that nobody was going to the games, that you should be able to, I thought I could get it for even cheaper because 200 was still a little rich for my blood. I wanted to get in for a little cheaper. But I think I would have settled on 200 if that's what it was at the end. It was like, okay, if it's 200, I'll just pay the 200. I'll get in the door. Not that I could necessarily afford it, but I could have put it on a card or something. But what happened was that first game, I think it was the Ecuador versus Cote d'Ivoire, actually. You start to see people in town for the game. And one of the things I didn't realize was that we have a large Ecuadorian population here, just west of the city in Upper Darby. But also like Connecticut, New York, they have a large Ecuadorian population. Also Cote d'Ivoire, I guess they have fans coming from New York as well. But, you see this sea of yellow at the game from all the people from Cote d'Ivoire coming to the game. Or sorry, from Ecuador coming to the game. And I think it started to inspire people. And, then you had Brazil, right, the Brazilian game. And so all the Brazilian fans were here. And they were just, I remember the partying, because I live about a mile from the sports complex, like the partying after they won in our area. Somebody left a cell phone on our windowsill outside. I don't know who that was. I left it there. Maybe they came back and got it. Maybe somebody else took it. I don't know. But it kind of inspired people, and people were starting to have fun with it. Like they like the international flavor that had come to Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is a very international city as it is, but to have these all these soccer fans coming and enjoying the city, and sort of us exposing them to our city, and them giving us their culture at the same time, inspired a lot of people. And I think what happened was that Philadelphians were looking at it like, yeah, I want to go to one of these games. Like, oh, $200, that's not bad. Let's go to that game. Ecuador, Curacao and Cote d'Ivoire, let's do that. And it bumped the price up. And I kept watching it. It got up to like $500 or $600 before I knew it. And that $200 was gone. And then I was watching, I was like, okay, maybe I'll get like a last minute deal. And it never happened. It ended up going up to like $700, then like $1,000. And the thing with the World Cup tickets is you can't buy them any closer than 3 hours before the start. So after 3 hours, you can't buy the tickets anymore. Whereas, in America with sporting events, especially with me living so close to the sports complex here in Philadelphia, I'll get tickets sometimes like 10 minutes before the game starts. So there was none of that there. And they when I was looking at the numbers, they'd sold all but like 30 tickets, I think, on SeatGeek. So there wasn't a lot available. So I will say, like the World Cup has won Americans over, despite the fact that there was this large sort of Trump cloud looming over everything that was making it all gross, and of course all the expensive tickets, the expensive transit, and all of that. The Gianni Infantino making all the stadiums being renamed, right? You can't have it's not Lincoln Financial Field, it's Philadelphia Stadium. All those kinds of things. I think it like really was making people like annoyed, and everybody wanted to see this thing be a bust, right? They wanted to see it be bad, especially the whole Peace Prize thing with Trump. We wanted to see it go bad. And in fact, the fans here, they won us over. I know I was on a subway train last weekend. It was the weekend that the Supergirl came. I watched Supergirl. When I was taking the subway back, it was before the Croatia-Ghana game. And we had the subway was just filled with Croatian fans that were all lubed up and just singing and chanting. It was a ton of fun. I had no idea what they were saying. It was all in Croatian, but it just again, it's infectious, right? You see that kind of thing, and it's really fun. So I would say like the world soccer fans, they came here and they've kind of won all of us Americans over. They've made us less cynical about it. Now this Trump thing, I think, is going to hurt things some. It'll be interesting to see, especially now with the U.S. out. How many Americans continue to follow the tournament? We'll see, but I think it's been really fun. At least, and again, there's a part of me that's going to be happy when this is all done in 10 days because we'll kind of have our city back. But here in Philadelphia, we already had our last game. It was the France. Who's France playing? Not Egypt. That was Argentina played Egypt, but whoever France played and beat in that game, that was the last game here. And so that was last weekend, I think last Sunday, I think the game, it was the 4th of July. That's right. The game was on the 4th of July. So that was it. We don't have any more games here. They still have the Fan Fest area, which I may go check out at some point, but yeah, it's been interesting. Again, thinking about myself in 1994 when I was first introduced to soccer through the World Cup that we had here, and I just loved it, and I was excited, and I couldn't wait to start watching, the sports and the games in Europe. I think the two things that happened after that. So my biggest, I loved Dennis Bergkamp. He played for the Dutch team. I thought he was great. So that's how I became an Arsenal fan. Was that I saw him and I was like, oh, who does he play for? Oh, he plays for Arsenal. Okay, that's the team I'll root for. Also, in America on ESPN on Monday afternoons, they would play they would replay kind of the spotlight La Liga match from the weekend. So it was almost always Real Madrid or Barcelona games. So I kind of knew those teams, but that was my introduction to La Liga. So it was like I was doing like Premier League and La Liga, and I was really getting into those sports. The MLS was kind of a mess. The MLS was, I don't know, like at the time they were like doing like when they first started, they rolled out the sport. They had like a shootout thing, and they had like they had the clock count down, which I actually kind of like that in America. In America we have clock keepers. We don't have the referee keep the time, so the game ends when it goes 0-0. The clock keeper's keeping keeping the time. The ref might say, "Oh, add a few seconds here or there because of something happened," but for the most part, we don't have stoppage time or anything like that. So it's a little bit nicer there. So that was one thing. The old MLS didn't have stoppage time. It's just like when the clock went 0-0, that was it. And it was kind of like, oh, that's kind of the fun of watching European sports, is that we kind of, it was something different, so they had to bring all that stuff back. But anyway, the MLS was kind of a mess, but following the Premier League and La Liga, and then eventually I got into Serie A as well, and in the Bundesliga. It's been kind of fun, and I told myself if the World Cup's ever back here, I've got to absolutely go to a game, and I missed my opportunity to go to this one because I couldn't afford $500 or $600. That just would have been way too much to put down for a game. $200 was probably too much as well, so I didn't get to do it. But also, I was kind of just not really interested at all. I was kind of like, the way everything was going here, I was kind of not feeling it. So to kind of be won back over, again, 30 years ago when I first got into soccer because of the World Cup being here, to have it back here again. I don't know. It's been kind of a nice experience, in spite of all the other things that have happened. And again, I think Trump did his darndest to make it bad again. And so we'll see. Kind of see how much. But I think Americans that are here, I think as we still see the international flavor in our cities, I think that's still going to keep winning people over. All right, well, yeah, I guess we'll wrap things up here. So, because it's me, I'll do my plugs. Obviously, marketing sales, you already know about that, so we don't have to plug that. That's been plugged enough on this episode. The site, dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com, that's where you can find our reviews. You can find links to our YouTube channel, links to, the podcast, anything like that, my books, all of that. You can check that out there. But thank you for listening, and we'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.